All right, so have you ever noticed music just sounds different when you've had some weed?
Oh, absolutely.
Like, does it actually sound better,
Yeah.
or is it all in our heads?
It's a question that music lovers and scientists have been wondering about for ages, and it turns out there's a pretty good chance it's not just in your head.
So there's actual science to back this up.
Yep, we're learning more and more about how weed can actually change how our brains process music,
Wow.
down to like the basic elements of sound.
So not just like some hazy stoner myth.
Not at all. Think about it this way. Music is basically organized sound, right?
Right.
And those sounds have basic elements like pitch,
Uh-huh.
duration, loudness, and what's called timbre.
Okay.
Pitch is basically how high or low a note is.
Gotcha.
Duration is how long it lasts.
Mm-hmm.
Loudness is pretty obvious.
Yeah.
And timbre is kind of like the sonic color of a sound, so it's what makes a guitar sound different from a piano, even if they're playing the same note.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So is the research saying that weed can mess with how we perceive those elements?
That's exactly what's being suggested, yeah.
Wow.
For example, there's some evidence that weed can temporarily change our perception of duration,
Okay.
making time feel stretched out. It can also impact how we experience loudness, making music seem more intense and also more emotionally powerful.
Interesting.
And even our perception of pitch and timbre can be affected, making those sounds seem clearer, sharper, and more spatially separated.
So it's like weed is working like some kind of sonic enhancer.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
Like it's almost like those studio tools they use to like
Yeah.
polish a track, make it sound super crisp and everything.
It's really fascinating, and a lot of musicians have been tapping into this effect for decades,
Really?
Whether they realize the science behind it or not. Like, there are tons of stories about, you know, legendary bands like the Beatles and Fleetwood Mac
Mm-hmm.
using weed to enhance their creative process, their listening experiences. They talk about hearing new nuances in music that they'd never noticed before. It's almost like listening with fresh ears.
I can only imagine.
Yeah.
And then you have the whole time warp thing that everyone talks about with weed.
Oh, yeah.
So how does that play into the music experience?
Well, time perception is this incredibly complex thing,
Right.
and weed can definitely make it feel a bit wonky. Sometimes it feels like everything's speeding up, other times it feels like it's slowing down,
Yeah.
but often it leads to this feeling of time expanding, which can be really powerful when you're listening to music.
So it's like our internal clock is getting all stretched out.
Exactly.
Like someone's pulling on a rubber band.
Yeah, like a rubber ruler.
It's making us more sensitive to those subtle changes in the music.
Exactly. It's like the spaces between the notes become way more noticeable, and that allows you to really dive into those nuances of the rhythm, the melody, and the harmony.
You know, that actually makes me think about this concept called Kairos time.
Oh, yeah.
It's all about experiencing time subjectively
Well,
based on like the meaning and the emotion of the moment.
right.
And it seems like weed could be boosting our experience of Kairos time, making music feel more emotionally resonant and meaningful.
That's a fascinating connection, and it makes a lot of sense when you consider what people often say about their experiences listening to music while high. It becomes less about just passively listening to the sounds and more about actually engaging with the music on an emotional level.
Yeah, yeah,
For some people, it's almost like a spiritual experience.
I can see that. But it's not just about warp time, right? I've also heard that weed can make you just way more attentive to music.
Oh, definitely.
Like you're really locked in.
Absolutely. There are studies that show that weed can stimulate alpha brain waves in the parietal lobe of the brain,
Okay.
which plays a huge role in attention
Yeah.
and how we process what we're perceiving.
So maybe that's part of why we get that feeling of being high.
It could be.
Like they just seem clearer. And our brains are suddenly working on another level.
Absolutely. Maybe weed is like dialing down our internal sensor,
Interesting.
allowing more of that auditory information to flow into our conscious awareness.
And then there's that whole thing with rhythm.
Yeah.
It always feels like music has this extra bounce and groove when you're high.
Well, we were talking earlier about how weed can affect our perception of duration, right?
Yeah.
And that actually has a direct impact on how we experience rhythm. There's research that suggests weed can make rhythm seem more distinct, almost expandable.
Oh, why?
Like there's more space to play with in each beat.
But those jazz musicians
Exactly.
who just effortlessly jazz things up,
Right.
adding all those little flourishes and fills between the notes, making it all sound smooth and complex.
Weed can heighten our sensitivity to those subtle rhythmic variations, making the music feel more dynamic and alive.
Definitely. And of course, we can't forget about how much more intense music can feel when you're high.
For sure.
It's like the emotional peaks and valleys are just amplified.
Right. As I mentioned before, weed seems to create this wider scale for experiencing loudness, meaning the difference between a soft sound and a loud sound feels greater, making the whole sonic experience that much more powerful
It's true.
and emotionally engaging.
You know, that actually explains something I've always wondered about.
What's that?
Have you noticed how much reverb and echo is used in those, like, stoner music genres?
Oh, yeah.
Like psychedelic rock and reggae dub.
Absolutely.
It's almost like those sounds are deliberately mimicking the altered perception that weed creates.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
like they're trying to recreate that heightened sense of space and intensity
Yeah.
that weed already brings to the table.
Yeah, that's a really interesting observation. It wouldn't surprise me if those sonic choices were influenced, consciously or not, by those artists' own experiences with weed.
I think so too.
Yeah.
So are we really saying that music is objectively better on weed?
Well, based on what we know so far,
Yeah,
it definitely seems like there's a strong case to be made that weed can enhance how we experience and process music.
for sure.
It affects everything from our perception of time and rhythm to our attention and emotional engagement.
Pretty amazing.
Of course, more research is always needed, but it's an exciting area of study.
Absolutely. So here's a little experiment for everyone at home.
Okay.
I want you to go listen to I Want to Take You Higher
Uh-huh.
by Sly and the Family Stone.
Great song.
Both the studio version and that legendary live performance from the 1969 Woodstock Music Festival.
Oh, yeah.
Just really pay attention to how you experience the time, the rhythm, the intensity of the music.
Mm-hmm.
Especially those little details you might not have noticed before. It's a trip.
It really is. That's what makes this whole conversation so fascinating, you know? It's about opening ourselves up to new ways of experiencing and appreciating music.
It's like weed is giving us this backstage pass to how our brains work, showing us just how much they're capable of when it comes to processing and enjoying music.
It's a great reminder that there's always more to discover, both within ourselves and in the music that we love. What's really interesting is that these effects of weed on music perception aren't just limited to like how we hear existing music.
Oh, really?
There's also evidence it can influence the actual creative process.
Whoa, so you're saying it doesn't just change how we listen to music,
Right.
but it can actually help create new musical ideas.
That's exactly what some researchers think, yeah.
Wow.
Think about, like, those jazz musicians we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
Who just seem to effortlessly flow between the notes, improvising, creating on the spot. Well, there's this idea that musicians who use weed might be more open to taking those creative risks,
True.
experimenting with new melodies and rhythms,
Right?
breaking free from traditional structures.
Because they're like in the zone,
Exactly.
and the weeds just like got their creative juices flowing. They're
Right.
just riffing, letting the music take them to some like uncharted territory.
It's like a sonic playground where anything is possible.
And this creative exploration isn't limited to just jazz, right?
Oh, definitely not.
You see it all over the place.
Yeah, across a range of genres.
From psychedelic rock to reggae to electronic music.
It's like weed opens up this whole new palette of sounds and ideas.
Do you think there's maybe a deeper connection between weed and, like, the evolution of music?
That's an interesting thought.
Like, maybe those early blues pioneers who were pushing the boundaries of music
Right.
with all those new sounds and styles. Maybe they were tapping into something that weed helped unlock in their creative minds.
It's certainly possible.
Yeah,
After all, weed has been a part of human culture for centuries.
that's true.
So it's not a stretch to imagine that it might have played a role in shaping musical expression throughout history.
Maybe it, like, helped us hear the world differently.
It's fascinating to think about.
Yeah,
And as our scientific understanding of weed and its effects keeps evolving, who knows what other musical mysteries we'll uncover?
I'm sure there are a ton.
We're just scratching the surface.
You've definitely given me a whole new perspective on music.
Glad to hear it.
And maybe on weed, too.
That's the power of knowledge, right?
Absolutely.
It can transform our understanding of ourselves and the world around us.
I'm already ready to put on some music and see what new details jump out at me.
That's the spirit.
Approach it with an open mind,
Right.
a curious heart.
And you might just be surprised at what you discover.
And don't forget, everyone, I Want to Take You Higher by Sly and the Family Stone.
Such a good one.
Both the studio version and that legendary 1969 Woodstock Music Festival version.
Classic.
Really pay attention to those rhythms, those sonic textures, that overall energy.
Yeah.
It's a trip.
It's a sonic adventure you won't soon forget.
And speaking of trips, anyone who's ever felt that heightened awareness and connection to music while enjoying some weed knows it's a special thing.
It really is that shift in perspective, you
Yeah.
know? You can really immerse yourself in the sound.
Right.
And that's what makes this so exciting.
Totally.
It's about opening ourselves up to new ways of experiencing and appreciating music.
Exactly. It's like weed is giving us a look behind the curtain at how our brains work
Yeah.
and how much they're capable of when it comes to music.
Right. It's a good reminder that there's always more to discover,
For sure.
both within ourselves and in the music
Absolutely.
that we love.
So if anyone listening is feeling a little adventurous, I say go for it.
Yeah.
Experiment responsibly, put on your favorite tunes, and see where the music takes you.
I agree.
You might just unlock a whole new level of appreciation for those songs.
Yeah, and remember, there's no right or wrong way to experience music. It's all about finding what resonates with you, what moves you, what makes you feel alive.
That's beautiful.
Thanks.